Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my fine friends. Welcome to the 6th episode of Season 10 of the Tom Petty Project podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Brown. This is the weekly podcast that digs into the entire Tom Petty catalogue, song by song, album by album, and includes conversations with musicians, fans, and people connected with Tom along the way. Last week's show looked at the epic It's Good to Be King, and unsurprisingly, there were a few social media comments about it. Over on Instagram, Lisa Kelly Pennington has guessed 5 correct ratings in a row now and said, "You're doing a great job this season, Kevin, getting them all right so far." Also, thank you very much, Lisa, and thanks as always for keeping me posted on your progress. The dream, of course, is to hit at least one season where you go 100% with your guesses. We'll see maybe if that's this season. On Twitter, the fantastic Tommy Edwin commented, "Much deep sadness in this song. So much so that I worry about leaving audiences depressed if I play it at shows." And this is a good point. It's Good to Be King is a killer live track, but if you're playing in a small setting, it's almost too intimate and raw to be carried across by a single musician. Though Jake Thistle did a fantastic job covering it a couple of years back when he posted a video of himself playing it alongside Wildflowers and Crawling Back to You. So Tommy, put it up, man. Post it. Let's see what you got. But I also do see what you mean. Steve Ursula added, "I think this song is incredible. I'd put it in my top 2 or 3 tracks on the album. It's whimsical and profound, darkly funny, and very sad all at the same time." And again, it's hard to find fault with any of that. The problem with Wildflowers, if you can call it a problem, is that it's so good that any 2 or 3 tracks could be your favorites on any given day. But this one usually rises, to the top or close to it for me as well. On Facebook, Nora Hayward Olsen commented that this seems almost heretical to say, but Good to Be King has never done that much for me. However, and she says in brackets, and before Kevin bans me from the page, as usual, I went back for another listening and got a deeper insight. I'm not sure one note and a drum fill has ever started off a song so effectively. Well, first of all, I can't ban you from my page, Nora, for something as excellent as having a different opinion on a song I love. That would be churlish and very, very silly, wouldn't it? The more I podcast about music, the less and less judgmental I become in my views on music I don't like. The more you're exposed to other people's passion for songs that you dislike or apathy towards songs that you think are amazing, and the intersect of your shared passions or apathies, I think that reveals a lot about art, and if it's not too grand to say, about humanity. In conversations about Tom Petty, Queen, Van Halen, Genesis, Foo Fighters, The Misfits, and Metallica, I've found way more common ground with people than I have points of contention. And the old adage, "it would be a boring world if we all liked the same thing," is so incredibly accurate. Jack McNay said, "It's Good to Be King was the last deeper cut I devoured in his lifetime. The memories of that particular retail job, college courses with that ravishing young dandelion of a girl, those mountain roads traveled et al. Ring every time I think of the song. A sweet little queen who can't run away. It's good to be king, whatever it pays." Isn't that all of our fever dreams if we're being truthful about it? Not in a sinister way either, just that love release everyone needs. And first of all, Jack, I love the phrase young dandelion of a girl. That's in my notebook now, and if you're not using it in a song lyric, I think I might end up doing. Laurie Hall comments, "This version of the song from Finding Wildflowers is magnificent. I call it Benmont's version because he plays so beautifully on that version. I turn it up and get lost in it." And how incredibly lucky we are to have multiple versions of most of these songs from the demos and the Finding Wildflowers releases. Speaking of versions, my executive associate affiliate producer, Paul Roberts, disagrees with something that I said in the show. He responded, "Great pod and assessment of If I Were King." Thanks as always, mate. Slightly disagree with one point, though. This track is improved once it's played live, and in my honest opinion, better than the album version. The extended jam is amazing, and in his later sets, it became one of the many highlights. I was a bit curious about this, so I had to dig around on setlist.fm, and it seems the band usually had at least one improv/jam song in the set, sometimes more with covers. It started with the forgotten Dog on the Run, changed to Breakdown, which was subsequently replaced by King. I think it stayed that way to the end. Keep up the great work. Thanks a lot, Paul. But this just reinforces what I'd replied to Laurie Hall, that the thing about great songs is it often doesn't matter how you dress them up or rearrange them as long as you keep their heart. And It's Good to Be King is a song that you can play in all sorts of configurations and have it be an absolute knockout. I just think the way that the album version is recorded is absolutely exquisite in its precision and dynamic sensibility. A couple of people highlighted specific lines in the song, which I always love to do. Jamie Dunst commented that, "I love this song. I feel it speaks to me even more nowadays," before saying that, "I always took the line, 'a sweet little queen who can't run away,' as the singer can't keep a relationship and they always leave him." And we had a little chat about the nuance of Tom using the word can't as opposed to won't. But again, art is all about interpretation and resonance. Well, interpretation to a reasonable limit. If you listen to Rebels and think that Tom is advocating for Southern independence or any such silliness, you're most definitely on the wrong lines. But I would still defend your right to be wrong. I think. And Jennifer Underwood Walker honed in on a different line saying, whatever it pays. That line gets me every time. Finally, the wonderful Mary Beth Donnelly commented, can't wait to listen. I've been thinking lately that maybe Learning to Fly is the granddaddy of this song, in as much as it talks about the fleeting nature of royalty, power/command and control, I think, at Lost and Gained, that it can all disappear fast. Like You Don't Know How It Feels, I think this song can sound at first arrogant, but we know Tom well and understand that absolute monarchy was not at all his quest or MO, but some modicum of control in an uncontrollable world, unpredictable personal life, and a fickle chosen vocation. Very deep, much deeper than it sounds at first blush. We'll listen on the drive home. All great points, as always, Mary Beth, and I hope that you enjoyed the episode. And as an extension of that power and control theme, I do think that the cautionary vignette in the middle of the song sees Tom basically saying that this isn't a goal worth aiming for. But thanks as always for sharing your always eloquently articulated thoughts. And thanks to everyone else too for sharing your thoughts, your comments with me. Always fun to read different takes on these songs that I do every week. But that's social media done now. So it's time to dive straight into the depths of despair with one of the saddest, if not the saddest, song on the record. Only a Broken Heart. In Conversations with Tom Petty, Tom tells author Paul Zollo, I liked that phrase, it's only a broken heart. Like you can throw away the most serious ailment known to man, like saying it's only cancer. It's a pretty song and kind of a bittersweet one. And that summation from Tom really does encapsulate this song in a nutshell, doesn't it? Before we start proper, this week's episode is going to be a bit different to the usual structure. And this is mainly because of how my guest segment is structured this week, which I'll talk about just before we get into. In the scripted portion of the show, though, or right now, obviously, I want to talk more about the differences between the demo, final studio, and alternate versions of the song and highlight where I think they all excel and where I think they might have done a couple of things just a little bit differently. Only a Broken Heart is one of only two songs from the album that the Heartbreakers never played live. The other is a similar expression of sadness, Hard on Me. And I think it's telling that Tom didn't play either of those two songs live because while songs like Crawling Back to You, Time to Move On, and It's Good to Be King are laced with melancholic undercurrent, their overall message is much more universal and less openly and deeply personal. This song feels as close as we ever get to Tom laying his soul completely bare and vulnerable before us. And Ben Montench has commented on this, saying that Tom Petty was deep. The guy in Rebels or the guy in Spike, they are people that he knew around town that we all grew up with. But it wasn't him. This was. Of course, Tom also did open up on the title track of the album, but that song was also infused with a specific sense of hope and optimism that this song simply isn't. And I know that the lyrics of the chorus are, but I'm not afraid anymore, it's only a broken heart. But rather than that line being positive and forward-thinking, it's always felt much more to me like a person trying to convince themselves that they can slough off their troubles and that everything will be okay, when in reality, that's very unlikely. When you think of Adria Petty saying that she knew her parents' marriage was over when she first heard this record, you wonder if this song is the one or one of the ones that really drove that home the hardest. So let's compare the versions of this song that we have by starting with the difference between the demo and the version that ended up on the album. When you listen to the home demo, and all three will be linked in the episode notes, so you can go give them a listen. When you listen to the home demo that was included on the Wildflowers and All the Rest release, there are three really distinct differences that jump out at you immediately. The first and most obvious is that the demo version features harmonica, where the final studio version does not. And I'd love to know if Tom recorded harmonica for the studio version, but it was dropped in the final mix. I think it sounds fantastic on the demo, but I can also see why a producer would suggest that it's not necessary on the version that we end up with. The second major difference is the melody that Tom uses for the title line. On the demo, the word broken is sung using an ascending three-note line, where the final album version uses a descending line from the same start point but going in the opposite direction. In the liner notes for the All the Rest release, Mike Campbell actually comments on this, saying, I remember Rick Rubin suggesting Tom change the melody at the end of the chorus. That was just one little idea of how Rick might inject his opinion here and there, and Tom actually listened to him. The last thing in the song that's obviously missing from the demo is Tom's guitar solo to finish. And I'm guessing that this was conceived as a section during the recording process. And I do think it's an integral part of the song that elevates it. On other podcasts, I tend to talk a lot about concision and whether songs need to be as long as they are in some instances. And I'll talk about the solo later, but suffice to say, I think the solo section here serves an important purpose. And I don't tend to raise that, economy or length as a point on very many Tom Petty songs because I always feel that he was surgically economical at cutting any fat that might creep onto the body of his songs. I think that the way Only a Broken Heart is constructed and developed means that at 4 minutes and 30 seconds, it doesn't drag or overstay its welcome, even for a song that stays on fairly straight tracks throughout its time. So why would it matter if you sing one word one way versus another? It's just a way of singing a word, right? Well, this is one of those examples of where I think Wildflowers makes a strong case for spending a long time crafting a song or an album. There's a lot to be said for the raw, capture the moment style of the early Beatles albums, say, or even Let Me Up, I've Had Enough. But the devil, as they say, is in the details. And so it is with the line, It's Only a Broken Heart. I think that by singing the word broken in an ascending pattern, you're injecting hope into the line, especially as it lands on the major root chord. However, when you flip that to be descending, I think it takes away some of that positivity and makes it more resigned, a bit more about resignation. And going back to Tom's comment, like you can throw away the most serious ailment known to man. I think you lose a little of that futility by ascending that line instead of descending it. So again, that's just that attention to detail that I love about this album. Why then would you remove the harmonica part? Well, again, I think when you listen to the eventual studio version, it's as simple as this. The vibe and feel that they're going for would clash with the harmonica. And on the demo, that part gives the song a much, I'll call it folkier vibe than the lush languid track we end up with. It is introduced in the solo section at the end of the alternate version from Finding Wildflowers, however, but that version has a whole other feel to it again. I do think, though, that the harmonica could have been included in the final version in a specific spot, and I'll talk about that later. The last main difference between the demo and the studio version is the lack of that solo in the outro. The demo version ends with a really nice acoustic guitar lick, where the studio version ends on the mellotron note decaying. So if we skip over to the alternate version now from Finding Wildflowers, the most immediate difference there is the fact that Steve Ferrone is playing with sticks rather than brushes and on the full kit. So straight away, that groove is really different. The song is also slightly slower, and I've said on a couple of other episodes that tempo can often be critical to a song, and I'd argue that the tempo of the version that appears on the final album, that's the best tempo for this song. The next thing to say is that the piano and Hammond organ are much more prominent on this alternate version. There's also some additional percussion in there, and Mike's bass line is much, much busier. Another big difference is that the piano is much fuller in the solo section at the end, and the harmonica is introduced, as I said, to excellent effect. Finally, another major difference is the lack of double tracking on Tom's vocal. It takes away that airiness and sort of almost air of mystery to the song and to the vocal, and really makes that vocal much more direct and plaintive. So we have three very distinctly different versions of the same song, with the consistent parts being Tom's very restrained vocal delivery and the combination of two acoustic guitar parts. But apart from those two consistent foundations, the different arrangements, the tempos, the instrumental flourishes contrast with one another quite significantly to give you three very different feels. Okay, people, it's time for some petty trivia. Your question from last week was this. On which album, also featuring members of the Heartbreakers, did Wildflowers percussionist Phil Jones appear? Is it Knocked Out Loaded by Bob Dylan, Belladonna by Stevie Nicks, Mystery Girl by Roy Orbison, or Land of Dreams by Randy Newman? Well, this was a sneaky, horrid trick question because the answer is all of them. The prolific and spectacularly talented Phil Jones first appeared on Hard Promises and would go on to appear on most albums up to and including Wildflowers, as well as touring with the band as a percussionist in the early 80s. Your question for this week is this. Phil Jones appears on the Pack Up the Plantation live album on 4 tracks, including Insider, also featuring Stevie Nicks. But on which other track on Hard Promises, apart from Insider, does Stevie sing backing vocals? Is it A, The Waiting, B, Letting You Go, C, You Can Still Change Your Mind, or D, King's Road? Okay, back to the song. A dream for any musician who is a huge fan of an artist is to have access to every take of every part in a song. And man, I'd love to sit at the board one day and pick out different takes from different versions of any of Tom's songs. But this one in particular interests me because of all the songs on this immaculate album, I think this is the only one where I sometimes think, man, I might have done that slightly differently. So I might actually try a remix of this song if I can pull all the different parts out that I like and think could be placed in, but particularly the outro. Because for me, that solo being on the guitar, it's panned left and still being quite far back in the mix doesn't work quite as well as it might. There's a thinness to it that's definitely deliberate, but I think maybe just loses a little punch that I would have liked the song to have had at the end. The piano in the alternate version is, for me, the way the solo should have gone, either complementing that guitar or even taking the lead entirely. I think that it gives the outro more depth and richness, and heck, I could even argue that the harmonica really builds that outro too in the alternate version, and I would have loved to see some of that make it onto the album version. Maybe Rick and Tom thought that the organ, mellotron, and harmonium were enough keyboards and that the guitar solo, cuts through some of that. But that little guitar lick flourish from the demo is such a nice little sign-off and would 100% be the way I would have chosen to end the song had I been in the room. But I wasn't in the room. I'm just some random guy 30 years later picking apart genius. But hey, it's kind of the idea of what this podcast is, isn't it? There are, of course, personal preferences, and every one of you will have a different take on each of the versions of this song, as will my guest for this week. For today's episode, I had to pivot my guest conversation slightly. I had to reschedule the chat I was going to have with my former guest, Ivan Anderson, about Only a Broken Heart. The three words that Ivan chose to describe Tom Petty way back in May of last year were verge of tears. And that seemed to fit fairly well with this song, which is why I'd asked Ivan to talk about it with me. But our schedules just wouldn't line up, so we're going to get Ivan back on to talk about a different song from the album. So in his place, this week, I got a hold of the guy who creates all the guitar music for this podcast and who wrote and recorded the theme music. He also happens to be my best friend and my co-host on our Queen podcast, Seaside Pod Review. He's been on the podcast before as my second Petty 8 guest, and I thought I'd ask him to listen to Only a Broken Heart and give me his thoughts as someone completely new to the song. As a superb songwriter, musician, engineer, and producer himself, I always find that his insights are interesting and valuable, and honestly, I've learned more from him about music than any other person living or dead. We're trying something different today too, and I hope it doesn't get me in any trouble with the Tom Petty estate. To explain, on Seaside Pod Review, we play the song through in its entirety, stopping it at certain times to talk about what we're hearing. And I thought it would make some sense to preserve that format, as it's a rhythm that Randy and I are really comfortable with and works very, very well for us. So for the first time in the podcast's history, you're going to hear the song we're talking about. And on the very small off chance that anyone from the estate is listening in, I will restate that I do not have advertising in the podcast, and I do not monetize this show in any way. So hopefully people understand that this is a respectful use of Tom's music for the purposes of music appreciation and critique. There may be a little bit of repetition of things I've already said in this chat because I always write the episodes without listening to my conversation with my guest, and in this case, before I even had that conversation. With all that said, sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with my great pal, Randy Woods. Mr. Woods, Mr. Randy Woods, who I'm very used to podcasting with, just not on the Tom Petty Project. You have been a guest on the Tom Petty Project before. You did the Petty 8 for me, which was a grand little experiment they did where you listened to 8 songs that you'd never heard before. Well, as my other guests kind of got waylaid and I couldn't record, you jumped in and listened to another song you'd never heard tonight. So thank you very much for doing that.
Not a problem, Kevin. I'm always here for an acquaintance.
Dragging you into the podcast now. You don't get it. Don't force enough podcasting on you as I'm dragging you into the podcast now. How do you feel about that?
Well, you know what, Kev? I really feel like you are the podcast guru, and I would be. I don't know what. Maybe I'd be a sidekick. I don't know, but I feel like the level of podding that you do and the level of podding that you've dragged me into has turned me into I guess a podcaster myself, which. I can't believe it because I don't listen to podcasts. I don't ever. I mean, I have, but as a rule, no podcasts. But I appear on one and now two podcasts. I've been asked to be on another podcast with Corey, but
Hmm.
I think maybe he found somebody cooler and more qualified, possibly better looking, and I would assume thinner.
Oh my goodness, we've fallen back into our seaside pod review rhythms. This is good. Okay, so the song we were talking about today, mate, is "Only a Broken Heart."
Yes,
So from the Wildflowers album, and I don't think you really know a heck of a lot about this album, right? I mean, you don't really have the background. I mean, you did listen to "Crawling Back to You" and you liked it when we did our Petty Eight, but you don't know where this fits within Petty's canon. I think that would be safe to say.
that's safe to say. I would say there was a point in my life where I would have thought I was a pretty decent Tom Petty fan,
Hmm.
but you have certainly eclipsed that. Uh, um, and there is a certain point where I kind of moved on with listening to other stuff. So,
Yeah.
having said that, I really never listened to Wildflowers, the album, which is apparently, but I'm told, uh, maybe his best or
I
one of.
it definitely one of 100% one of. I mean, the three that people tend to sort of go to: Damn the Torpedoes, Full Moon Fever, Wildflowers. That's usually the three
Yeah,
that most people would sort of put at the top of the tree, and then others kind of come in and out here and there based on preference or mood.
for me, it was definitely Full Moon Fever. Absolutely was, and still is my favorite Tom Petty
Yeah,
album. Uh, of which I've played many songs live off
yeah.
of in my own band. Yeah,
Well, this one's so Full Moon Fever obviously was Tom's first solo album,
right,
of course, solo, but he still had Mike
of course.
Campbell and Ben Montench played a couple of bits and pieces on it. This is the second solo album, but really isn't a solo album at all because most of the Heartbreakers play on most of it. But it's more to do with it was a solo album. Rick Rubin, the producer, sort of asked him, "Is this a solo project or is this a Heartbreakers project?" Because it definitely feels like the lyrical content and the tone of the songs that are on this album are much more personal, really, than anything
Mhm.
else that Tom's done to this point. And so
Yeah.
this is writes and records this album while his marriage is really,
Mm.
I mean, on the rocks is sort of a fairly gentle way of saying it. In fact, his daughter Adria, when she heard this album, said she knew her parents' marriage was over.
Oh,
So
really?
sort of it was a big sort of time where he spent 18 months in the studio making this record, and I think as much to just be in the studio and escape and get away
Yeah.
from troubles at home, sort of thing. So that's kind of the context for this album and
Right.
specific and especially this song that we're going to listen to.
I find it interesting that they wouldn't have just called it a Heartbreakers album, which also kind of reminds me of reminds me of remember when Kiss
Oh,
released solo albums and they all played on each other's.
yeah.
So maybe it's a little bit like that. But no, but it's funny. Why I wonder why. I wonder what the logic was. And how many albums did he do with Ruben? Do you know?
Three,
Just the one? Three?
three, yeah,
Which in itself is actually, if I mean, I don't know a ton about Rick Rubin except that I know that he doesn't know how to mix and doesn't play an instrument or can't sing or write lyrics,
right,
and then like produces albums.
yeah.
He must be some sort of a guru. What does he do? Does he like pat them on the back? Oh, that's really good. Do more of that.
Well,
I don't know.
there's definitely a conversation in the wider musical community about what Rick Rubin does on albums, and you speak to some artists who he's worked with who say he does nothing, just lays on the couch and literally sort of does that. And then you'll
Yeah,
get other people like Mike Campbell, Ben Montench, and Tom who say that if it's the right project and he's invested in it,
yeah,
then he has very good insights, right? But he's definitely, like you said, I mean, he isn't a mixer, he isn't a musician in his own right, but he's got an ear, right? And I think that
yeah,
sometimes you do need that outside influence to say, yeah,
yeah.
that's good. However, what if? And so there's
If
one more to,
memory, oh, sorry, I was just going to say, if memory serves, he did a Paul McCartney album, and I do believe Paul McCartney told him at one point. If, he told Paul McCartney at one point that he didn't really like whichever song this was, and that he thought he could do better. Can you imagine telling Paul McCartney that?
but I think by that point though, Ruben's,
Oh,
he's got that
yes,
pedigree now that he can actually talk to people at that
yeah,
level and sort of offer his opinion, right? But I mean, that's, but
yeah,
the other thing is that's why you bring someone like that in, right? You don't
yeah,
bring someone, you don't really want someone who's a yes man. I mean, and Petty was never about that, working with Jimmy Iovine, working with Jeff Lynne, working with
yeah.
Ruben. He wants people who are going to make his songs better. And that's, and again, we talk in the community, the Petty community a lot about Ruben was exactly the right guy for this album because, the couple of songs you've probably heard from this, you can't imagine Jeff Lynne producing those because they just don't sound anything like Full Moon Fever or Into the Great Wide Open. And if you had that sort of more polished or very sort of fastidious attention to detail of separating all these things out, I think you would lose a little bit of the heart of this record.
An interesting point, because as soon as I listened to Only a Broken Heart, uh, you could almost tell right away that Jeff Lynne didn't do it, because there had been another half a dozen acoustic guitars playing at the same time
Yeah.
and panned left, right, and center. And
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, so breakdown of musicians. So it's only Tom Petty playing acoustic guitar on this. So there are, like I said, we've got two guitar parts, pan slightly left, slightly right. Tom's playing both of them, and he also plays the solo in this at the end, or the sort of that joint solo with the piano. Mike Campbell is playing bass on this one. We got
Oh, yeah.
Steve Ferroni on drums, and then Ben Montench on piano, harmonium, mellotron, and Hammond organ. So there's a lot. It's like you said, there's not much going on here with the guitars, but there is a lot more than you sometimes think on first listen going on with the keyboard section.
I don't know why, but I'm just a sucker for the mellotron.
Yeah.
So as soon as I heard it in this, I was like, oh yeah, I like that. It just gives it this, I don't know, it's otherworldly, I suppose. I don't know. I just love its sound, and I think it works really nicely in this song.
So we should tell people too that what we're going to do is on our other podcast that Randy and I co-host, Seaside Pod Review. That's a Queen podcast. We actually listen to the songs, and then we sort of pause it, stop it, talk about it. So we are going to do that today. So let's fire it up, Randy. We'll start listening to Only a Broken Heart here.
Yes, please. Oh yeah, Kev, and it's in the key of C, which I like to call the people's key. So Kev, we're just listening to this first verse here, and I don't know if this is just me, and like I said, I'm really not familiar with the album, but it sounds very Beatle-esque to me.
Yes.
And I was also just going to add to that pretty tried and true chords.
Yeah.
You know, in this verse, it could be a lot of songs when you hear those opening chords, right?
Absolutely, and it's got, like, to me, like you said, Beatlesy, and very specifically George Harrison. I mean, you could hear this on All Things Must Pass, right? I mean, it's right in that same tempo, feel, groove, and of course, Tom and George were great friends, and he was a big influence. So you can really feel that, and 100%.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I kind of like the structure of this, because I always think that here comes that feeling I've seen in your eyes back in the old days before the hard times. That's your verse.
Yeah.
And then structurally, but I'm not afraid anymore, is almost a pre-chorus, and it's only a broken heart is a one-line chorus. So it's kind of a neat sort of compact little self-contained verse chorus section there, eh?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's just a 2-line chorus, eh?
Yeah.
And I mean, I have no idea why, but I'm always I'm a fan of the D over F sharp over D.
Yeah.
I really like the way it lands and it's written. I mean, listen, if anybody can write a hooky chorus, it's this guy, right? So, and to me, it's that, right?
Yeah. So you just get that very gentle introduction there of the harmonium, right, in that left channel. It's just, and again, it's all padding. Ben Mott's not doing anything on this song, really. He's just keeping that sort of that mood and layering up those keyboard sections. I will play very quickly once we're done. There is an alternate version of this song where the piano and sort of what Ben Mott's doing is a lot busier. And I think that this is better. I think this is a better sort of presentation of this song. But
is that the demo that you had sent me as well?
I think I sent you the demo, but there's also an alternate version. There's an alternate studio mix. Because I sent you the demo. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was going to say in the demo, I'm not sure who it is. Maybe it's Tom playing some harmonica.
Yeah.
Which I quite liked.
Me too.
I thought it kind of suited it nicely.
Yeah.
but I still prefer this. I still prefer the studio version.
And I like the because the other thing that you maybe if you're not a music person or a nerd, you don't maybe notice that the vocals doubled
Yeah,
pretty much throughout this entire song. So you've got the doubling on the acoustic guitar and sort of that slight panning, and then you've got this doubling on the vocal as well. So it does give it that very, I think you said otherworldly. It gives it that
yeah. It's feathery.
mystique.
It's feathery. It's
Yeah,
light and just the ever so slightly different nuance. I mean, doubling vocals is as old as soon as they had enough tracks to do it, but it gives it just those slight little differences in the performances give it that feathery, which is almost a chorusy
yeah.
effect, which is well, to great effect in this particular case.
Out of the sunshine, down in a valley, but I'm not afraid anymore. It's only
Don't know if you catch that. So obviously Steve Ferroni is playing with brushes, and so it's a pretty straight backbeat up to this point. But then you get that little bit, dun, 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 dun. You get just a tiny, tiny little flourish on the snare.
Yes,
And it's
yeah, yeah,
so subtle, but it's so good. Like it's just that little thing that moves the song. Just like, oh, that's kind of cool,
yeah. I think he's kind of stirring the pot, right? The kind of the
Yeah.
pea soup thing. Yeah.
a broken heart. What would I give to start all over again? To clean up my mistake.
So we just into the bridge section or the C section, as we would call it. So what would I give to start all over again to clean up my mistakes? And again, what I find cool about that is where it ends up, doom, 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 doom. It feels like it's leading into another repetition of that. You think you're probably going to get that same progression again, and then maybe different lyrics or something. But instead, it goes back into the verse. So it's almost like a little bait and switch thing that he does to keep you on your toes a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. Yeah, it does sound like it might go back to the B flat there right away. I was just going to add too, just since we're talking about a little bit of slightly about the lyrics here. I know the place where you keep your secrets out of the sunshine down in the valley. Really like that.
Yeah.
I think those are great lyrics. Really nice lyric writing there. I mean, it's just painting pretty word pictures. Or it does for me. It's like,
Yeah.
oh wow.
Well, and there's lots of those, right? I mean, there's portent is the word I always think about in this song. Like it is beautiful, but it's also got that damaged,
Yeah.
kind of broken quality underneath it. So
Fragile.
yeah,
Fragile. It sounds like he's in a moment of fragility.
The moonlight, stand under heaven, wait for an answer, hold out forever.
so now you get that. So we've had the harmonium coming on the left channel in the previous verse, and now you get that mellotron coming on the right.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of it's all very gradual, and you don't
Yeah.
really
It just creeps
necessarily
in.
notice it until you're listening for it, right?
Yeah, it just starts to creep in, and all of a sudden you're
Yeah.
like, "Hey, was that always there?" Which, of course, it wasn't, right?
Yeah.
But another testament to great songwriting, right? This is just my opinion, of course, but
Yeah.
I'm a fan of when you start and you build and you create, and so that at the end it's a bigger thing, and in some case maybe even it's gone different. But
Yeah.
you start small and big. It's a progression, like a book, like a
Yeah.
whatever.
And it's that thing that the truly great artists do where the bones of this song are very simple. Like you said, it's a well-worn chord progression in the verse. The bridge gives it a slightly different flavor, but there's
Yeah.
nothing going on there that's really taking you in any new territory.
No.
So what you got to do then is build that up in other ways, whether that be lyrically in some cases or whether it be a tempo change or whatever it might be. But here it's just that constant layering up of those background textures that I think is just, like you said, is very effective.
Yeah, well, and then the other thing too is like, and I did say that it's a well-worn progression, which of course it is, but you don't have to. You don't have to be odd for odd's sake if that's not what's called for, and in
Yeah.
this case, I don't think it is. So, but you're right. Though still, even that B flat does on the bridge does take it to a real nice takes you another place, right? So
Yeah.
But don't be afraid anymore. It's only a broken heart. What would I give to start all over again? To clean up my mistakes. I know your weakness.
So we talked about the vocals being doubled, but we didn't really talk about where Tom's sitting in his vocal range. And it's not quite a falsetto, but it's that very gentle. And that's why I always think George, maybe, because George did that quite a bit. He'd sing in that same kind of spot where he's not quite crooning and he's not quite falsetto. He's in somewhere in between, you know?
yeah, and he's not like projecting either. You can tell
No.
he's not singing from his like literal gut,
Yeah.
singing from his heart. But and so it does give it that real nice quality. I just kind of had a little bit of a weird thought here. I mean, the lyric and the lead sheet that I'm looking at here, they do call this bridge the bridge, but you could almost argue that it's a chorus, and
Yeah.
what they're calling the chorus is a pre,
Yeah.
because it's like it's just as hooky and as strong as what they're calling the chorus, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But it's neither here nor there.
Well, no, but that's the thing that I know that people who listen to this podcast do enjoy, and the thing that people who listen to our other podcasts enjoy is that kind of conversation. Again, for non-musicians, if you don't have that musical vocabulary, well, you know what a chorus is when you hear it and you feel it. And
Yeah.
that does sort of that, it is a different section. It's got a different progression. So that kind of does feel like a chorus where,
And he's repeating the lines, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I also quite like the I was just gonna where the heck is that there? It seems like he's like, it's like he's talking to himself, right?
Yeah.
And I really like, it's like this inner dialogue that's come out, and back further to the what we we're saying earlier, it makes him seem vulnerable and
Yeah.
and probably not in a great spot, as you had pointed out at the start of this.
Well, I'll give you the quote from Conversations with Tom Petty, which is the book that Paul Zollo wrote, which is where he sat down with Tom and talked to him about pretty much every song in his catalog up to that point. And he said that I liked that phrase, "It's only a broken heart." Like, you can throw away the most serious ailment known to man, like saying it's only cancer. So it is that sort of it's trivializing something, and that's what I'd sort of thought. Or my takeaway from this is, when you say "don't be afraid anymore," it's only a broken heart. That's someone trying to convince themselves that they'll be okay when actually, something's wrong.
Yeah, it's this internal dialogue saying, "Hey, listen, like, just like you'd say to yourself, hey man, this has happened to a million people, and I'm just one of them, and I'll like there again, it's his inner dialogue, which it's great.
You've seen my dark side, the end of the rainbow is always a long ride, but don't be afraid anymore. It's only a broken heart. It's only a broken heart.
So one other thing that obviously you wouldn't know, but Rick Rubin had actually said to them, because in the demo version he sings "It's only a broken," so he goes up. But in the studio version, he comes back down. And so I think that my sense of that is that when you go up, it sort of injects a little bit of hope into the
Hopefulness,
line.
which we don't want here.
Exactly.
folks. Yeah.
Clever little trick, though, right? Like those, like I said, I mean, again, for those who are listening who maybe didn't listen to our last episode, Randy has recorded 1 million songs for 1,000 different artists and written millions of his own, and so you've gone through all these sort of those little sleights of hand that songwriters use all the time, and that's what I love about this album compared to some of his others, like I said, it took 18 months and they were in there for months and months. And Tom said, like, they would do like 10, 12-hour days for days and weeks at a stretch. But it's that attention to detail of, okay, how can we make this exactly right? I mean, that's good enough. When you sing it in that ascending line, it's fine. It sounds great.
Yeah.
But when you switch it, it just gives that inflection, that little bit more weight that you're looking for.
Yeah. Real quick before we just finish this up here. I know your weakness. You've seen my dark side. Great lyric.
Yeah.
Really good.
Well, even the end of the rainbow is always a long ride too. I mean, that's the end of the rainbow being something that you can't ever get to.
Yeah.
This is just good imagery. And he's such a brilliant writer when it came to that kind of stuff.
A non-ending ending.
Yeah, and so folks too, when we talk about Mellotron, if you don't know what Mellotron is, think Strawberry Fields, and you can really hear it there right at the end because it's the last thing to decay, right? So
yeah. Well, it's funny they didn't come up with a more clear ending. And so am I allowed to criticize on this or no?
of course you are, absolutely.
Okay, because this is just a personal preference.
Yeah.
Just a personal preference, and there's gonna be lots of people that think I'm stupid. I don't like a 12-string guitar solo.
Right.
They don't sound good. They always come across as they're kind of hard to distinguish, and I know it's Tom doing it right, and he's loved by millions, and he's a better musician than I ever will be. But it's not a great solo either. There's a couple of little plinky rough notes in there, and
right.
Yeah, he maybe should have just got Mike to lay something down on a nice 6-string or something. It's just my opinion.
Absolutely, yeah.
And don't give up my email address because I don't want to.
No, but this is what we do, and I would agree that. And the other thing about that solo is I think that it could have been mixed a little bit slightly differently because it's panned just that it's a little bit light and it's panned just over a little bit in the left. Well, if it's a solo, bring it into the middle, and bring it up a little bit for me, right?
Yeah, me too. Yeah, that's my opinion. Yeah, even if you did play it on a 6-string and clean up a couple of little clunky little notes,
right?
It'd have been fine because I mean, it really serves the purpose. We don't need a face melter on here. We don't need an electric guitar to come in or anything. But that's just my, it could have maybe we did a Mando solo or something. Even maybe would have fit better.
Yeah.
But hey.
Well, and that's where again, I mean, that we talk about this. That's definitely a decision then, right? Like you said, those couple of notes where they don't quite ring. You call them plinky notes. That's what we're referring to is when you don't quite strike, you don't get that resonance on the note. But that's the decision, right? It's like, okay, well, actually, I quite like that. So Tom's obviously thought maybe he's trying to express that sort of humanity and vulnerability where everything's not all lined up and perfect. So it's definitely a deliberate choice. But as with you, it's a choice that I think I would have done something different. So I'm going to play just a real little bit here of the alternate version because they do something different in that section, and I think that section of this version is a little bit. I prefer it a little bit. So I'll just play a little bit. I'll play a little bit at the top so you can get the general sense of how they've changed it, and then I'll flip it back to the end.
Sure.
1, 2, now 1, 2, 3, 4.
Sticks instead of brushes straight away. It gives it a way different groove, eh?
Yeah, full kit right away. Yeah.
Yeah, and this sounds live.
Could be. Yeah.
And that's where you definitely got the Hammond there. So you don't really hear the Hammond on the studio version, I don't think.
No, I didn't really notice it, truthfully.
No.
Too much.
So that's good enough to there. Might be a hair slower as well, actually.
Maybe a beat or two slower, yeah.
So my comment there is that I think even if you put a piano solo there, I think a piano solo would sound so much better. It would be much richer.
Yeah, that piano was very tasty there.
Yeah.
It even helped. It even helped that acoustic a bit. The Davida
Yeah.
just kind of carried it, and yeah,
Fills in the sound a bit, right? Fills in that kind
Mhm.
of that sonic space a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Well, there we go. That's Only a Broken Heart. I mean, unusually, you were talking about lyrics today, Randy. You don't always get into lyrics when we're talking about music because you're,
What? Of course, I love lyrics.
Yeah.
No, just for me, the lyrics are the hardest thing
Yeah.
to write and to make sense of. And I just feel like when I see good ones, I recognize it, and
Yeah.
I just thought I should call it out. Because if anybody who's listened to the Queen podcast that we do, sometimes, and when I say sometimes, I would say about 50% of the times, the lyrics are not very good at all. Don't tell anybody over that listens to Queen; they'll shoot me. But it's true.
Yeah, there's especially depending on who's writing the lyrics. If
Yes.
if a certain drummer has got the pen, well,
Sure.
sometimes it's a little
Ridiculous.
bit. Yeah, but Tom is. I think we've talked about this. I think lots when we've been over visiting. It's one of the things that I love about Tom Petty is his ability to craft very good lyrics and sort of have that attention to detail where he's good enough. Generally, doesn't happen with Tom Petty. He'll sit and make sure that it's as good as it can be.
Well, I mean, he's also in a different genre, right?
Yeah.
Like I think if you're just playing some loud stadium rock or whatever, I'm in love with my cars just fine.
Yeah.
But if you're an artist that more introspection and
Yeah.
I mean Tom wrote some of his own throwaway lyrics too. Let's not,
Yeah.
he definitely has those too. But yeah, he's a better lyricist than maybe all the guys from Queen. Maybe that could be argued. I'm not saying I'm arguing it,
Yeah.
but I'm saying that someone could, and his name might be Randy, but it's probably not though.
I'm staying well away from that argument.
Okay, all right. I take it all back.
No,
I take it all back. I don't mean any of it.
I would tend to, on average, tend to probably agree with you, Randy. I would tend to probably agree with you.
I knew it.
Okay, well, general thoughts. Any sort of general last feelings about Only a Broken Heart?
Yeah, I would just say that I think it's I really think it's a really great song. Today's the first time I've ever heard it.
Yeah.
And I really, really like it. I think it's really, really well done. I'm really a fan of the lyrics. And it emotes, right? And I think that's what good music does, that, whether it's up or down, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, thank you very much for jumping online with me. It's much earlier than we usually record podcasts.
Absolutely.
And you're just back from a long trip, so I thank you very much. And you're dry now because you've been damp for a lot of the last 24 hours.
Yes, I'm very happy to be dry. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, man. I appreciate you coming on and helping me out with this.
You bet. Cheers. Thanks, Kev.
Okay, Pettyheads, that's it for this week. As journalist Jan Yahelski writes in the Wildflowers and All the Rest liner notes, if Wildflowers is an album about taking stock of one's life, Only a Broken Heart is a watershed moment on that excavation of self. And everything about the way the final album version of this song is arranged and produced caters toward that idea of excavation. The busyness of the piano and bass in the alternative version is stripped out, and the harmonica lead from the demo is also abandoned in favor of allowing those double-tracked vocals to take the weight of the lyrics and just drop them in your lap. Coming between the Titanic, It's Good to Be King, and Honeybee, this song could easily have become a little lost or overwhelmed, but I think that, outro aside, the production choices on this song ensure that it holds its place as a sonic rest period and an eerie, forlorn interlude that acts as that watershed moment that Jan Yahelski talks about. It's the first full glimpse of Tom's inner turmoil bubbling to the surface. Kind of like the first time you see the shark in Jaws, only it's held up way better in the intervening years. Doesn't look nearly as dated.
You're going to need a bigger boat.
Though a strong, intensely personal lyric and a beautifully constructed piece of instrumentation, I just have a sense that Only a Broken Heart could have been even better, and is one of only two or three instances on Wildflowers where I think there is still a little bit left in the tank. So for that reason, I'm going to say that Only a Broken Heart is a 7 out of 10. A very, very strong 7 out of 10, but a 7 out of 10. The Tom Petty Project is a proud member of the Deep Dive Podcast Network. Go check us out on Twitter at DeepDivePodNet. I'm sure you'll find something there that you like. There's loads of shows there that I listen to as appointment listening. You can also check out the podcast, Seaside Pod Review, a Queen podcast that I do with the guy you just heard in this episode, Randy Woods, who also, again, performs all the music you hear in the podcast. I also check out the Ultimate Catalog Clash that I co-host with the one and only Corey Morissette. This season, we are digging into the first 20 years of the Foo Fighters. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and YouTube at The Tom Petty Project, and on Twitter at Tom Petty Project. Go follow, like, subscribe, and do all of those things. Keep talking to me on social media, and I will keep reading out your comments on the show. As a weekly reminder, the Tom Petty Project is not affiliated with the Tom Petty Estate in any way, and when you're looking for Tom's music, please visit official streaming platforms or go to your local independent record seller to grab some actual physical media. If you're looking for official merchandise, go to tompetty.com, and if you're looking for merchandise for this show, please go to tompettyproject.com. Don't forget to check out the Tom Petty Nation and Tom Petty Fans Forever groups on Facebook, and check out Tom Petty Radio, which is channel 31 on Sirius XM. Until we meet again next week, keep listening to and sharing Tom's music. Try to be kind. Try to say I love you to someone at least once a day. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll be back with you next week to talk about track 7 from Wildflowers, the gleefully mischievous Honeybee. Bye-bye.